Test. Test. What's with all the chair shuffling? What's with all the chair shuffling? Oh, you like that chair better? Okay. Yeah, the chairs with the high backs and the short backs, some are probably more comfortable than others. Okay, let's all done. Man, it is cold out there. Ooh. You walk outside and you just bites, takes a bite out of you. Anna, when do you guys plant? No. That's you. Thank you. That's for your corn. Or your corn and soybean. Really? April, okay. Huh. See, I'm thinking of wheat, where you plant it and it's dormant and then it sprouts up. Yeah, that's different. Corn tends to sprout up so fast. Emily, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Do I need to be louder or is this fine?
Nope, this is okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Emily, I will give Mrs. Schaefer your lab book. You can pick it up in the office, okay?
Oh, okay, thank you. I totally
Yeah.
forgot you had it.
Yeah. Okay, gang. Did you guys hear the governor's order yesterday? So Tom Councilman called me just before 6 o'clock, just for the governor's announcement. Apparently, starting Wednesday, all instruction will be online. So this will be our last meeting face-to-face. Sad but true. So I will, we're lucky in that we got all our labs done. That's why we piled the labs on early in the hopes that we'd get them done should there be a lockdown. Many people were very skeptical that we'd make it this far. Frankly, given the season and the way cases are climbing in Michigan, I think as an institution, we've done pretty well. Especially when I talk to my friends at other institutions, we really have done pretty well. So I think as an institution, we should not be complacent, but we should at least not be beating ourselves up. So, excuse me. The seminar from last Friday, the link was given to Mrs. Schaefer. That should be available soon. It'd have been nice to have seen more nursing students there. I don't think I saw a single nursing student there. But anyway, you can watch it when you have time. And let's see, what else? Yeah, that's kind of where we are right now. Okay, so I want to do some cleanup on immunology, and then after we do the immunological cleanup, so to speak, we will then get into infections, starting with infections of the skin. And we'll go from there. The book tends to handle infections in an organ system sort of fashion. That's very useful, particularly for nurses, but it leads to some confusion sometimes with organisms that can cause lots of different infections. So just keep in mind, for example, Staphylococcus aureus causes plenty of skin infections, but it can also cause endocarditis, it can cause wound infection, it can cause pneumonias, it can cause lots of other infections. So just keep in mind that some of these organisms are pretty versatile when it comes to the types of infections they can cause. All right, so let's have a word of prayer, then let's get started. Jesus, thank you for this cold day. Thank you, you brought us this far. We pray for our state and our nation as the cases climb. Help us to be wise, to live smartly, to exercise hands, face, space, and ventilation. Thank you for these students and their hard work. Get us through now. Take us through the end of the semester. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. That's annoying. All right, let's say you have a T cell that gets activated. It gets activated, of course, by antigen. So you have an antigen. That antigen fits a specific T cell receptor. So we can say it fits, binds to it. This cell becomes activated. Now, activated T cells don't drop things. The activated T cell is going to express a molecule on its surface called CD40L. That's the ligand for CD40. Now, why is this important? Because B cells, they express on their surfaces CD40. And if this activated cell now finds a B cell that recognizes the same antigen, you can have a bridge made between this activated T cell with its T cell receptor So that would be the alpha chain, the beta chain, and then the CD4 molecule. So this is a T helper cell. That's important. Let's put the antigen over here. We'll put the antigen kind of in red here. This B cell then is going to recognize this now the T cell is on its surface the ligand of CD40. And then the B cell will express CD40. So this interaction is going to essentially direct the B cell to become activated and to undergo isotype change. So this type of antibody here is an IgM. It's a surface level, surface bound IgM. So the T cell, depending upon the nature of that antigen, it's going to elicit different types of cytokines depending on what type of antigen this is. And because of that, you're going to elicit different types of isotype switching depending upon what type of cytokine that T cell expresses. So if you have an antigen that tends to be found at mucosal surfaces, then this is going to make interleukin-5 and TGF-beta. Interleukin-5 and transforming growth factor beta. If it makes interleukin-5 and TGF-beta, this B cell will become activated, and the particular cytokine will induce this now to isotype switch so that it makes immunoglobulin A. What if this cell encounters a different type of antigen? Say it's a type of antigen that is normally involved with viruses or with bacteria that will live either inside cells or will exist cells or something like that. Then in a case like that, said T cell is going to express interferon gamma. Now, if this T cell that is activating the B cell expresses interferon gamma, it's now going to tell the B cell to isotype switch to make immunoglobulin G. Immunoglobulin G. And what happens if your T cell encounters antigens normally associated either with allergies or with worms? Now, problem with worms, white cells can't phagocytize them, they're too big. So what do you do instead? You surround it with mast cells and basophils and eosinophils, and they dump the granules all into the space around the worm, and that kills the worm and dissolves it because those granules are full of toxins and enzymes that degrade the worm, toxins that kill the worm, enzymes that degrade the worm. Pretty soon the worm will just kind of get the ghost and then get dissolved. So in this case, if it's worm type antigens, allergies, things like that, this T cell is going to make interleukin 5 and interleukin 4. And now this B cell will isotype switch to make immunoglobulin E, immunoglobulin E. So this essentially is how you isotype switch to the different types of antibodies. Originally, they make IgM and IgD. Remember, IgD is never secreted. The isotype switching and affinity maturation involves the removal of those DNA sequences that have the constant regions for these other antibodies. Which one do they pick? Depends which cytokines they're activated with, because this activation here will cause these B cells to make cytokine receptors. If they receive interleukin 5, TGF-beta, they'll isotype switch to IA. If they receive an immunoglobulin B signal, they'll isotype switch to immunoglobulin G. If they receive an interleukin 4, interleukin 5 signal, they'll isotype switch to immunoglobulin E. So that essentially is how you signal these cells to make the different types of secondary antibodies. Remember, your secondary antibodies always bind the target, the antigen, much more tightly than your original IgM antibodies. That's why your secondary immune response is faster and always more specific than the primary one. And this is the whole strategy behind vaccination. You're trying to prime the immune system so that you have a secondary response. That secondary response then becomes the response of your memory cells. Excuse me. We'll get into memory here in just a bit. All right. Now, first off, are there any questions on this before we move on to the different types of T helper cells? Very good. So here in this slide, it mentions two types of helper cells, a T helper 1 and a T helper 2 cell. What are these different subtypes of T helper cells? Let's take a look at the different types of T helper cells. Okay, so T helper cells express what surface co-receptor with the T cell receptor? CD. Please say it louder. It's very hard to hear you with a mask on. CD4. CD4. T helper cells are CD4 expressing T cells. T cytotoxic cells are CD8. 8 expressing T cells. All right, so the T cell is only activated by the antigen-presenting cell. It presents the antigen with which type of MHC molecule? Class 2. Class 2. T cytotoxic cells, the antigen is presented by MHC class 1. Class 2. Class 2. And again, we'll stick our antigen on here. We'll do the antigen once again in red. So this is major histocompatibility complex class 2. Remember, that is only expressed in APCs. So it's expressed in dendritic cells, macrophages, B cells. Class 1 MHCs are expressed in all nucleated cells. MHC2s only are expressed in professional APCs. Only. All right. So here is our T cell receptor. And here's our T cell. And let's give it a, here's our CD4 co-receptor. Interacts with this like that. It's your CD4. That's the T cell receptor. And this is a T helper cell. It's CD4 plus. Now, you remember that you have a two-signal activation system in order for this T cell to be activated. You also have this molecule expressed on the surface of the T helper cell. That is CD28. And CD28 has to be bound by a molecule from the APC, which is called B7. And I leave myself enough space here to do that. We'll just, let's just fix this so that. Okay, and then, I think the only class in middle school I almost failed was art. Yeah, you can tell why. We had drawings once for a field mycology class I took. My professor looked at my drawings. He said, I've been doing this course for 30 years. In 30 years, these are the worst drawings I've ever seen. You can see my mother was incredibly talented when it came to art. Boy, I miss that, Jean. Oh, my word. And where am I teaching my class? In the art building. I'm sure the professors here are all tearing their clothes. Okay, enough about my lab work. So this is CD4 here. Let's do CD4. So here is CD28. This is B7. You have the two signal authentication, that's going to activate the T helper cell. All right, what if the APC is infected with a virus or an intracellular bacterium? It is going to express now a particular set of cytokines, and the big one it's going to express will be interleukin 12. So that's for viruses or intracellular bacteria. Makes interleukin 12, and if there's a natural killer cell around and it's been dealing with intracellular stuff, this will make gamma interferon. That can influence the cell too. This cell is now going to become a so-called T helper 1 cell. T help 1 cell. And the T helper 1 cells will secrete typically interferon gamma. That interferon gamma will activate macrophages, and they will also make interleukin 12. And interleukin 12 is actually going to help activate natural killer cells, which are involved with dealing with intracellular parasites and things like that. What if your APC is dealing with parasitic worms and things like that? Little creepy crawlies that go bump in the night, so to speak. Well, it is now going to be a completely different set of cytokines. So now we're talking about worm antigens and things like that. AG is abbreviation for antigen. Now, when the T cell, and I don't want to redraw all this because that would take too long. Now it's T cell that is hooked up to it. It's going to make a cocktail consisting of interleukin 4, interleukin 5, and also interleukin 10. Get my Oxford comma in there. And that is going to convert this cell into a T helper 2 cell. A T helper 2 cell. That's this cell right here. Now, T helper 2 cells will make also interleukin 4 and 5 and 10 and 13. Interleukins 4, 5, 10, and 13. These particular interleukins will help stimulate basophils, mast cells, and eosinophils. Mast cells, basophils, and eosinophils. And those are involved in fighting parasite infections. Now, these cells and this particular type of T cell also play a role in allergies. And people with asthma, this is a particular T cell population that is rather high. And some of the drugs we'll talk about next semester in pharm for asthma are actually going to attack some of these interleukins and their activity. And some of these drugs are relatively new and unfortunately quite expensive, but they're incredibly effective at intractable asthma. Okay, you move. You see, okay, good, all right. Okay, now the next set of cells, if you have an APC, where'd my, oh. If an APC that is dealing with extracellular bacteria and fungi, so extracellular bacteria and fungi, then this APC is going to activate a T cell and it will produce a veritable cocktail of different so your T cell here, this is now going to produce interleukin 1 interleukin 6, interleukin 20C, and transforming growth factor beta. And you're going to get a cell that is called a T helper 17 cell. T helper 17 cell. T helper 17. Why is it called T helper 17? Because it makes interleukin 17. Interleukin 17 is like blowing the shofar for neutrophils. So this recruits neutrophils. And remember, neutrophils are professional phagocytes. They burn their candle at both ends. They come in, they fight hard, and they don't live very long. But they're very good professional phagocytes. And then our last APC to consider now this one, if you have 3 different cytokines, and in this case, usually the immune response has started, it's gone on for a bit. Now some of these APCs will start to make these 3 different cytokines, and that's interleukin 6, interleukin 21, and interleukin 27. Interleukin 6, interleukin 21, interleukin 27. This will produce a so-called T follicle. T follicle helper cell. T follicle helper cell. These are to express interleukin 21 and gamma interferon. And what are they going to do? They are going to, they also express the CD40. CD40L, these are going to interact with B cells, and they're going to produce memory B cells. There aren't very many of these cells. They're called follicle helper cells because they're found in the follicles of lymph nodes. So these are going to help make memory B cells. Memory B cells. Remember, plasma cells. Plasma cells usually, they don't divide. They survive about 6 weeks. So once you make a plasma cell, you've made a terminally differentiated cell. It just secretes antibody. It's not going to divide. Once the cell undergoes isotype switching and then gets to the plasma cell stage, it doesn't divide anymore. The memory B cell, however, lasts for years and years and years and years and years. All right, those use 3 different T cells. T helper 1, T helper 2, T helper 17, and T follicle helpers that help induce memory B cells. Memory B cells. That's this stuff here refers to. And because the T helper 1s secrete gamma interferon, they tend to activate the natural killers and T cytotoxic cells as well. And of course, remember, all T cells, when they're activated, make interleukin-2. That's the growth factor for lymphocytes in general. All right. Questions? Very good. Now, how do you turn the immune response down? How do you regulate it? How do you stop it? Remember this one fact. The immune response is antigen driven. The immune response is antigen driven. If antigen starts to wane, the immune response will usually start to wane, except when it doesn't. What if the immune response kicks off a kind of storm inside your body, and that storm takes a much longer time to abate? This is precisely what we see with COVID-19. With COVID-19, the virus usually only replicates about 10 days in your body-ish, 8 to 10 days. The more severe disease after that is largely immunological. This is a reason why in the protocols you guys may have seen, any of you seen the MATH protocol, M-A-T-H? No? No, not yet? Okay. You will. You will. If you deal with COVID patients, you will. This protocol calls for the giving of methylprednisone, but methylprednisone is given later, not earlier. It actually harms a patient earlier, helps them later. Why? Because the early part of the disease is the virus replicating. Later part of the disease is a dysregulated immune response. So, how does the body turn the immune response down? There are three main ways it turns the immune response down. Let's look at those. Okay. Goodbye, glorious artwork. No. All righty. Just when you thought it was safe to go back into the T cell forest. All right, remember in the thymus, we talked about this last time, your T cells are presented with self-antigens. If they interact with self-antigens, they undergo programmed cell death. What if you have a T cell, it interacts with the cell antigen, but it does very poorly. So it's not enough for it to induce programmed cell death, but it's enough actually for the body to go, not too sure about you, pal. What should we do with you? This cell then becomes a T regulatory cell. A T regulatory cell. T regulatory cells do three things to mitigate the immune response. So these are always at work to make sure the response doesn't overdo itself. First of all, they express two different interleukins that tend to, in combination, will tend to downregulate the immune response. First of these is interleukin 10. And the second of these is transforming growth factor beta. These two in combination will cause APs to express program death. The program death ligand 1. Program death ligand 1. What's program death ligand 1? Well, when cells bind to program death ligand 1, they tend to be induced to undergo program cell death. So instead of APCs actually activating T cells, they induce tolerance to that antigen. This is the basis of immunological tolerance. Now, did anyone here, you get, or any of you maybe know somebody, they had to get allergy shots when they had, yeah, I did too. I did too. I grew up on a farm and I still had massive allergies to certain types of pollen. Olive pollen. Horribly allergic to olive pollen. There have 2 olive trees right across the street from my house. Allergy shots consist of very, very small amounts of antigen. So the antigen to which you are allergic, it is diluted many, many times, and then you get very, very small, fine amounts of it. What this does is it induces populations of T regulatory cells. And these T regulatory cells essentially shut down the activation of T cells to it because of the production of interleukin 10 and TGF beta. Now there's one other enzyme that they produce, and it's an enzyme that degrades the amino acid tryptophan. So it's a tryptophan. Tryptophan is a relatively rare amino acid. However, if cells don't have enough tryptophan, then they have trouble expressing receptors for cytokines. So this prevents cytokine receptor expression. So you have a whole population of T cells that are involved with turning down the immune response to regulatory cells. They make these enzymes and these cytokines that will essentially slow down cells, keep them from getting overactivated, and then prevent the APCs from actually activating further T cells. There are also other strategies. For example, T regulatory cells will make lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of interleukin 2 receptors. But they don't respond to interleukin 2 all that well. What are they doing? They're mast cell sponges for interleukin 2. What's interleukin 2? It's a growth factor for lymphocytes. By sponging up all this interleukin 2, the regulatory cells prevent these other T cells and B cells from becoming activated. Kind of a nice little trick. All right. Now there's 3 ways you turn down the T cell response in addition to these T regulatory cells. One is called energy. Energy. So it's energy except with an A. Now, T cells normally express CD28. CD28 will bind to B7 that's on the APC, right? And that's part of the co-stimulatory signal that activates it. As the immune response goes on, these T cells eventually start to transition into expressing another ligand called CLTA4. CLTA4 binds to B7 even more strongly than CD28, except this leads to, there's no activation here. So when a T cell starts to express CLTA4, it cannot undergo co-stimulation. Essentially, this T cell has gone into retirement. So think of it as T cell retirement. The T cell starts out, expresses CD28. As it ages, the immune response goes on. Now a little more CLTA4, a little more CLTA4, a little more CLTA4, a little more. Pretty soon, it expresses just CLTA4. And this is now a T cell emeritus. It's gone into retirement. That's energy. That's energy. Second mechanism is called clonal exhaustion. Clonal exhaustion. Now, remember that your Tregs cause CHCs to express programmed death ligand 1. As the T cells start to act, as they work, as they age, they'll start to eventually, they'll start to upregulate this PD1 protein on their surface. And now, if they try to interact with APC, these two will bind. That will induce this T cell now to undergo programmed cell death. These cells undergo programmed cell death, and they're gotten rid of. That's clonal exhaustion. Clonal exhaustion. Then there's clonal deletion. Clonal deletion. Clonal deletion. You have T cells, again, working very hard, but as time goes on, they now start to upregulate the FAST again. FAST is able to bind to the FAST receptor found on several different types of cells. This is an inducer of apoptosis. So cells age, they bind to this found on other types of cells, and now cells die. That's clonal deletion. So you have retirement, you have exhaustion, and you have deletion. That's how you essentially get rid of the T cells. What about B cells? B cells, let's do B cells in another color. I like the black because it writes so well. Oh, let's do purple. B cells, what if you have excessive amounts of antibodies sitting around not doing anything because antigen's been so well cleared from the body? If you have excess Ig, that excess IgG binds to a Fc receptor on the surface of the B cell. It's called Fc receptor gamma 2. Fc receptor gamma 2. If these bind to this, that turns them off. And now the B cells essentially experience a type of antibody-based feedback. Antibody-based feedback. Finally, there is a form of B cell energy. And the B cell energy simply is due to the fact their antigen levels go down. Without antigen to activate the B cells, like a car that's run out of gas, just kind of sputters to a stop and then go, and just float around. No antibodies to make. Now, if more antigens introduced, yeah, they can rear back up again. But without antigen, they sputter stop and then don't do anything. And remember, a plasma cell only lives for 6 weeks. So if he sputters to a stop after 2 weeks, you got 4 more weeks, and then you just are going to undergo programmed cell death. So that is an example of B cell energy. B cell energy. All right, that's how you turn the immune system, the immune response down. Okay, it's time for our break. After our break, we'll talk about how you make memory T cells, and then that'll be it on immunology. We'll start on skin infections. Okay, take them and come back rear and ready to go. Where Maddie is? Can you text her, have her info?
Yeah, I do.
Because she can't come, she can Zoom.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Just send her a text, or I've missed, this is like the second, third class she's missed.
Okay.
So tell her we're concerned, and, well, I'm concerned. Well,
Yeah.
if you're concerned too, you can tell her, but. Listen, your work in lab this year was just fabulous. Just fabulous. You have very good hands. You're very good. You're very skilled. Do you sew, or do you?
I like it.
Oh, okay. So you're used to doing good, fine work.
Yeah, we do like small pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you'd be good at like probably wound nursing, or maybe even surgical. Something like do something with good, a lot of hand-eye stuff. You'd be really good at that probably. So yeah, keep in mind, because you got some of the best hands I've seen in classes in terms of fine work. You're very, very good at it. So Anna, what's your brother doing?
They're stopped now with his mother, but he's helping I can do like start this like asphalt. They have to he's doing that.
Okay.
But they're done with that there, but he's helping my dad
Mhm.
harvest and I help him with his
Okay.
construction work.
His degree was business, right?
Right.
Is he using his business?
Not yet.
Not yet. Does he want to kind of start his own business? Or,
I don't know.
okay, so he's like Rachel. Rachel's in between right now, trying to figure out what she's going to do with her life. So. Is Haley okay?
I don't know.
This is like the third or fourth class she's missed. She's not Zooming. Do you have her info? Can you text her? And just ask her if she's okay. I know she's been sick a few times. I just wonder if she went or something or.
I don't think so. I know she might have had something, but I don't know.
Well, tell her if Zoom, if she does Zoom, I mean, she can be on Zoom. So I'm getting a little concerned. Okay. Oh, terrific. Thanks, Ruth. Okay, folks. One more thing to cover, immunology, and then we're out of the woods on that one. All right, let's angle this here. So, when your T cells are born, your T cells typically have a diet of interleukin-2 once they're first born, first activated. Now, it's not always the way. So this would be the case, let's say, activation, they express interleukin-2 and they expand, they proliferate. But at the beginning, they express interleukin-7. Interleukin-7. Interleukin-2 is like T-cell fast food. You get lots of quick energy, but it causes you to burn out rather quickly. So think of this kind of as McDonald's. Interleukin-7 is whole grain, fruits and vegetables. It's nutritious food. It allows the T cell essentially to live for a nice long time. And if this T cell, in the course of activation, if it happens to keep making interleukin-7, it will on to become a memory T cell. Now, the majority of your T cells will make interleukin-2, they'll expand, they'll become so-called effector. effector T cells, which will consist of T helper cells, T cytotoxic cells, so on and so forth. But a fraction of those, both T cytotoxic and T helper cells, will express interleukin-7 and will become memory T cells. Memory T cells. Now, memory T cells come in two types. There is a so-called central memory T cell. Central memory T cell. These tend to live in the lymphoid tissue. These can last for up to 25 years. Very long-lived sort of T cell. But these guys are not out looking for trouble, shall we say. They are essentially in the lymphoid tissue waiting for antigen to come to them. Then you have a so-called effector memory T cell. Effector memory T cell. Effector memory T cells are in the circulation. They are looking for antigen. If they find antigen, they will be able to proliferate and will be able to help mount an immune response against it. But they are essentially cells that are out there. They're the scouts, if you will, of the memory system. The central memory T cells, they're kind of holed up in the lymphoid tissue and they are waiting for antigen to come to it. These would essentially be kind of the officers of the memory system. These would essentially be the scouts of the system, but these are both systems. So every primary immune response will give rise to a set of effector cells and a set of memory cells. The bulk of the cells, of course, are effector cells. They, however, don't live as long. These cells are much long-lived. Memory B cells can live up to 10 years. Memory T cells, particularly central ones, can live up to 25 years. Now, some antigens do not elicit good immune responses. For example, killed toxins tend to not give very immune responses. So you have to have a tetanus booster every 5 to 10 years now, because the immune response against a killed toxin is usually not so hot. The other group of antigens that tend to give pretty lousy immune responses are carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, there's usually a little trick you use essentially to get a good response out of carbohydrates. So you take usually a protein, and then you latch your carbohydrate onto the protein. This now is much bigger. This bigger protein is now able to elicit a much more robust immune response. This is called a conjugated carbohydrate. Conjugated carbohydrate, your pneumovax, your vaccinations for pneumococcus are capsular carbohydrates, but they're called conjugate vaccinations. That's what they are. That's essentially how you get a good response from these, is by linking the carbohydrate to a protein. Chemically, this is called haptenization. haptenization. A hapten, chemically speaking, is a carrier. It's a carrier. Carries a smaller thing so that you get a response to the whole thing, and the response to the whole thing includes a response to that smaller thing you wanted to generate the response to. What other carbohydrate vaccination do you usually get? Think of the vaccinations you get. Which other one is carbohydrate mainly? How about Hib? What's Hib? Haemophilus influenzae strain B. Hib. You're getting a vaccination with the capsular antigens, which are largely carbohydrate. So the Hib usually also is conjugated. That way, you get a much more robust immune response against it. All right, so with vaccination, so passive immunization can be acquired via secretory antibodies in breast milk. Those would be IgA antibodies in breast milk. Or they would be IgG antibodies you get through the placenta. IgG antibodies you get through the placenta. Those will last for 6 months. Once the baby is weaned, of course, the IgA antibodies are no longer available to them. Now you're going to rely essentially on active vaccines, active vaccination. So there's 4 ways that you give a vaccine: intradermally, subcutaneously, orally, or intramuscularly. Intradermally, subcutaneously, orally, or intradermally. So think about, now that you know something about immunology, think about what happens when you vaccinate someone. The CD4 T helper cells are activated. They produce interferon gamma and interleukin 2. They promote the growth of immune cells, the class switching of B cells to produce immunoglobulin G or A or E or something like that. Your vaccines can be live attenuated or inactivated. They can be subunit or toxoid vaccines. So live attenuated, inactivated, subunit, live toxoid vaccines. So your live attenuated vaccines, you're giving the whole organism. The whole organism. But the organism has been grown in the laboratory so that it's weakened. And it does not cause robust active disease in an healthy individual. But it still fools the immune system into thinking you have a full robust disease. So you generate a full robust immune response against it, and therefore get a full robust memory system against it. So the attenuated vaccines are definitely the most efficient. They generate the best immune response. Subunit vaccines. Subunit vaccines. Oh, sorry. Inactivated vaccines, you give the whole thing, except it has been chemically derivatized so that it can't infect cells. So for example, the measles vaccine is an attenuated measles strain. You give it, you get a very weak growth of the measles virus in the body. The immune system gangs up on it, and you get this beautiful immune response that gives you lifelong immunity against it. The vaccine vaccine for polio. You take it, when I was a kid, we used to get it in the sugar cube. They don't give the sugar cubes anymore, I don't think. They put a drop of the Sabin vaccine on a sugar cube, and the kid would eat the sugar cube. The polio then is inactivated, but it's still weak. It infects the stomach. The immune system then reacts against it, but it's so weak it can't infect the nerves. That's a Sabin vaccine. The Salk vaccine consisted of poliovirus particles that were treated with formaldehyde. So you gave the whole virus, but it was inactivated. It could not infect cells. So you respond to the outer proteins of the polio virion. Nothing on the inside though. That's an inactivated vaccine. The Salk vaccine is an example of an inactivated vaccine. A subunit vaccine, is a little piece of the organism. You take a little piece of polysaccharide or a protein or something like that, and then you inject that, you're getting an immune response to that little piece. And with COVID-19, this is essentially what the vaccines that have been designed are meant to do. They've taken the spike protein, and the RNA vaccines that are available force the expression of the spike protein in cells. The cells will express the spike protein. They'll present it via MHC class 1 proteins. They'll activate T cytotoxic cells, and also some of it will get presented via MHC2. You'll also activate populations of T helper cells, and you'll elicit a robust immune response. I don't know if you read the news, anybody. Pfizer vaccine is out now. There's the other vaccine, not Moderna, Merck, is it? Is it Merck? Is it what? It's Merck or whatever. The other group, they're saying that their phase 3 trial shows that their vaccine is 94% successful in providing protection. I think when we actually give the vaccine en masse, those numbers will go down. But that's okay. That's still a pretty effective vaccine. Remember, flu vaccines, what was the flu vaccine in 2017? How effective was it? 34%. So if we can get a COVID-19 vaccine that's in the 80 percentile, that's pretty good. Toxoid vaccines. Here, you take a toxin and you express just a piece of it usually. Just a piece of it. You then inject that. That's usually your tetanus toxin. That's your toxoid vaccine. Very often these don't give you the best immune response usually. Okay, live vaccines include mumps, measles, rubella, and the varicella vaccine. Those are all live attenuated vaccines. Rotavirus, smallpox, yellow fever, those are all live attenuated vaccines. Inactivated vaccines, they're inactivated usually with heat or maybe with a chemical agent, you get very good humoral response to an inactivated vaccine. Your cellular response tends to be not so good. So hepatitis A, the Salk polio vaccine, rabies, and your influenza vaccines that you give to people older than 65 are inactivated vaccines. Subunit vaccines contain, again, just a portion of the pathogen. Polysaccharide vaccines, usually when your body responds to them, the response is T-cell independent, usually. Children younger than 2 years of age don't respond very well to polysaccharide vaccines. That's the reason why you wait a little longer to give them polysaccharide vaccines. So those will give you very good memory B cells. They don't give you very robust T cell immunity, but they give you pretty good B cell immunity. So subunit conjugate vaccines include things like your Hib B vaccine. Hepatitis B is a subunit vaccine. Your papillomavirus vaccines. Whooping cough vaccine is a subunit vaccine. And your strep pneumoniae vaccine. And if you get the chickenpox vaccine, the Shingrix vaccine, that's a subunit vaccine. And then so is the Neisseria meningitidis vaccine, meningococcal vaccine. Toxoid vaccines include things like the tetanus, diphtheria, parts of the pertussis vaccine. Some vaccines don't give a good immune response, and you need to give them with something called an adjuvant. An adjuvant. An adjuvant. What is an adjuvant? An adjuvant is a compound you mix with the vaccine, you give it with the vaccine, and it upregulates the irritation in the shot so that you prime the immune response against the antigens you put in. So the two most common adjuvants are aluminum salt or monophosphoryl lipid A. Aluminum salts or monophosphoryl lipid A. You may have seen some idiocy on the web about how aluminum salts in vaccines cause Alzheimer's or something like that. If any of you had the misfortune of seeing that kind of caca on the web, and it is caca. Know how much aluminum you get in a shot with adjuvant in it? Nanogram quantities. Oh yeah, that's going to cause Alzheimer's. I don't think so. I don't think so. And let me just say with a little end note here about vaccines, there simply is no credible link between vaccines, any vaccine, and autism. There's no credible link because it's been studied. It's been studied in massive, gory epidemiological detail. When you look at nations, or excuse me, when you look at populations of people who don't vaccinate, do you see autism in those populations of people? The answer is yes. At what rate do you see autism amongst those populations of people? It's just as high as it is amongst people who vaccinate. So right then and there, that should give you a little question about whether or not vaccines are linked to autism. Secondly, when you look at the onset of autism and the vaccination of children, many people say, oh, my kid got the vaccine and then 2 weeks later they started messing and they then became autistic. Did you also give them a little lick of ice cream during that time? I didn't know it wasn't the ice cream that caused the autism. Did they pet your cat? How do you know it wasn't the cat that caused autism? You see where I'm getting with this? You could actually graph, and this has been shown. When do people tend to drown? When they go swimming. When do they go swimming? When it gets hot. So during the summer, drownings go like this. If you look at ice cream sales correlate perfectly with drownings. So from that, you could conclude that ice cream causes drowning. Now, some of you are looking at me to say, okay, that's stupid. That's really stupid. You're right. That's really stupid. Correlation does not mean causation. Everybody say that with me. Correlation does not mean causation. Secondly, when you look at the medical records of people who claim that their kids regressed right after they got the MMR vaccine, it turns out you have this thing called memory bias. Memory bias, confirmation bias, it turns out most of the time they didn't remember it right. And if you look, for example, at one person in particular, I won't mention names, but her name is McCarthy, her kid actually was regressing long before he ever got his MMR. But she remembers it as the MMR correlated perfectly with his regression to autism. No, he showed signs of autism way before that, Jenny. Your doctor reports show that. You just don't want to say that. Instead, you want to get on television and you want to swear at doctors who tell you that you're full of baloney. So I have had several conversations online with people about this subject. They have been completely non-productive. I might as well talk to that table. I've been called every name in the book. There are some people whose minds are made up. You're not going to change their minds. But there comes a point, I think, where I don't think they should be deciding for the health of their kid if their kid is at risk. So that's a debate we can have at another time. Yeah, anyway. Okay, if you're interested in this topic, a pediatrician from George Washington University did a really nice article on the anti-vax movement in an encyclopedia that I edited called the McGill Medical Guide. I could let you read a reprint of that article. Also, Brian Deere's book on the Wakefield fraud is very good. I recommend that to you as well. Also, remember, oh, this is another issue. You guys have an assignment about a brochure you're going to have to put together. How big of an imposition is it going to be to do that online over email and what have you? Have you guys started it? You have started it. So finishing it then, really, once you get it planned out, that's the hardest part. Getting it printed, that's the easy part. Can you guys get that to me? You can just essentially, you can hand me an electronic copy. You don't have to give me a hard copy, or you can mail me, send me a hard copy through the mail, or email it to me and I can print it out. That's fine. You guys be able to finish that in a timely fashion, even doing it online? You're far enough along on, so, okay. Okay, everyone's done your bit. You're pretty happy with what you have so far? Okay, some of you are going like this, some of you are going, depends where you are in the process. Let me just say one thing about that. In the past, one of the biggest problems has been proofreading. The proofreaders in the past have usually dropped the ball. There's always been a misspelled word somewhere. And it's not the printer's job to catch that, it's the proofreader's job to catch that. So proofreaders, please look it over with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that there are no typos on it. Because if there are typos on it, I'm putting that on you. So, all right, enough of that sermon. Let's talk now about something completely different. First of all, are there any questions on anything about the immune system, immunology, anything like that? Okay, wound infections, skin infections, eye infections, blah, 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 so on and so forth. And here we go. Boy, that's annoying. All right, skin is designed to keep things out, and it's designed to keep moisture in. One of the biggest issues with burn patients is dehydration, especially if you get burns over a large proportion of your body, because the loss of moisture from your body is substantial with burns. Also with burns, you have a large breach of a good portion of your skin. That means you are now at risk for pretty massive infections. Skin is also colonized by a very robust normal flora that tends to keep other infections at bay. The sebaceous glands make an oily substance called sebum. The sebum contains fats. Those fats are hydrolyzed by lipases made by the bacteria that live on your skin. They produce free fatty acids on the skin. That lowers the pH of the skin. So low pH is also going to prevent the colonization of the skin by other microbes. Also, fermentation of various types of sugars on the skin will produce things like propionic acid, lactic acid, excuse me, and things like that, that will also further drop the pH of the skin. That acidic pH is important for preventing the colonization of your skin by other microbes. Now, if you change the secretion of these sebaceous glands, you can change the pH of the skin. Consequently, if you have a female patient who is on oral contraceptives, those oral contraceptives can sometimes change the sebaceous gland secretion, and that can change the pH of the skin. So she might be more susceptible to certain types of skin infections. So that's something to watch for if any of you do women's medicine or family medicine or something like that, and you get a patient, they're on oral contraceptives, short-term, long-term, whatever, do make sure that you do a nice little skin look over to make sure that they're not feeling dryness of the skin or certain types of, because if the skin gets dry, you can also be more susceptible to certain types of infections as well. So the epidermis also replaces itself very quickly, very regularly. Beneath the epidermis, you have the dermis, your blood vessels, a lot of your sensory nerves, what have you, are also found in the dermis. You also have various types of cells, Langerhans cells that live in the skin. Langerhans cells are antigen-presenting cells. They're a type of dendritic cell specific to the skin. These are APCs in the skin. And beneath the skin, you have the subcutaneous region, and that is the layer of adipose tissue. If you take the skin and pinch it, you can move, you notice it moves, back at that's your sub-Q. And if you give a sub-Q injection, you pinch and insert into the layer beneath the skin like that. And that's essentially what you're injecting into. You're injecting into this area right there, and that creates a depot, except that depot is subject to rich blood vessel supplies, so that depot will tend to dissipate really pretty quickly. Mucous membranes, like the kind you have on the mucosal surfaces of the nasal, pharyngeal cavities, and what have you, these cells tend to be replaced fairly rapidly. They all tend to be coated with mucus. You can see the clear, they're labeled here goblet cells. Those cells create mucus. Mucus is a glycoprotein, but the protein is decorated with huge numbers of very highly charged sugars. Consequently, mucus is very highly hydrated. It's sticky. It acts like molecular flypaper. So things land on it, and then the mucus gets cleared. Things try to invade, and they can run into this layer of mucus. Consequently, organisms may make mucinases that degrade the mucus so they can penetrate the epithelium. The epithelial cells are held together by junctions, tight junctional complexes. They don't let things through very easily. You're going to have to deal with that if you are a pathogen. Also, you have glands. What kind of glands are these? They secrete into a duct, so they are a come on, guys, A and P, review it. You secrete into the bloodstream, you're an endocrine gland. You secrete into the duct, you're a... Somebody say it, please. Okay, everybody, say it with me. Exocrine gland. Say it. Exocrine gland. You secrete into a duct, you're an exocrine gland. You secrete into the bloodstream, you're an endocrine gland. Exocrine glands are usually beneath the submucosa, and they will secrete any number of things, more mucus, digestive enzymes, whatever. If you are a nasal mucosa, you have so-called Brunner's glands. Brunner's glands that will secrete even more mucus in the submucosa. Oh, it's worth saying the mucosal area is divided from the submucosa by usually a layer of smooth muscle. And then let's see, eyes and what have you, blah, blah, blah. Okay. All right. Wednesday. We will pick up on Wednesday. If you can't come, that's fine. I'll send out a Zoom. We'll start on Wednesday at 8. We'll go 8 to 9 on Wednesday. And then Friday, same time, not same place. I will see you on Zoom. Look for the Zoom invites. I will send them out. Is there anybody who's going to have technology issues with Zoom, as far as you know? No? Okay, then I will look for everybody on Zoom on Wednesday and Friday. See you then.